Now that the winter 2023 anime season is over and I've watched pretty much everything that has interested me from the season, I thought it might be nice to try something a little bit different and basically run down my thoughts on what I happened to watch from the season. Now, this won't necessarily take the place of dedicated reviews for any shows that I might do in these seasonal overviews. If I feel like a show needs a full discussion on it, I would do it. In this case, though, I'm not really sure I would feel the need to do a review on any of the shows that we're going to be talking about today. But this is just going to be a little, hey, here's what I watched, here's what I completed, here's what I dropped, and why I dropped it, and just some quick thoughts on them overall. Did I like them? Did I not like them? Stuff like that. And if this goes over well, maybe we'll do this every season, just going over everything that I happen to watch once I actually get around to watching it. So to get them out of the way, let's cover what I did not make it all the way through, aka the shows I dropped. Starting off with one that I pretty much expected to drop pretty early on, although I thought I'd at least give it more of a chance than I did, being the sports anime Blue Lock. Now, if you know me, I don't tend to really like sports anime. When the pandemic hit, I tried to give them more of a fair shake, whereas in the past I had pretty much ignored most of them unless they were really short, meaning things like Ping Pong or Megalobox, stuff like that. It was only when the pandemic happened that I really tried to watch the longer sports anime that I hadn't really bothered with. And despite doing that, I really never found myself to be all that fond of them. Like, at best, I feel like they're okay. That's not really good enough. And a lot of the time, the problem I felt was the longer I watched them, even if I thought they were okay at the beginning, the more they got grating and annoying and the more I disliked them, but I was so far in at that point, it didn't feel right to drop it. So in the case of Blue Lock, it was a show that I really didn't feel like I would have the patience to watch all the way through, especially when it has a second season and a movie confirmed already. But I thought I would try it just to be fair to it, and I made it a grand total of one episode through the show. I guess that's not entirely true. I did watch the first 3 minutes of episode 2 and I was just like, I'm done. I don't care about soccer anywhere near to the extent that these people seem to care about it. And that's my underlying problem with sports anime, just not really having a reason to care about what's going on. And Blue Lock really didn't offer anything all that interesting to me to make me want to continue it. I'm sure that if you really do like sports anime, this will find you well, but it's just not for me. Another show I dropped after one episode was Onimai, which I know that there are people who really found this show to be better than it would seem and argue it is a very wholesome show, and I'm not saying that it might not be. I just don't think that even if it does become fairly wholesome, that it would be able to overcome a not very enjoyable first episode and just a very questionable premise that's kind of hard to kind of get behind, at least for me. I know it has its fans and more power to you, but it's just not for me. And then a show that I tried to watch a little bit more of, but just really wasn't feeling, was Farming Life in Another World. Now, there's a lot of isekai from this season, and I watched a few of them. This was one that didn't really seem to get talked about all that much as it was airing, but afterwards you had a couple people be like, oh, you know what, this was actually better than expected. I don't think it's bad based on the 3 episodes that I watched. I just think it's very bland. It really didn't offer anything to keep my interest, and I really did feel like I was struggling to get through those 3 episodes. There wasn't a lot happening. The characters really weren't that interesting. And to be fair, in episode 3, a lot of new characters show up. So to be fair, I didn't get a full grasp of all of the characters because of when I stopped it. But I watched those 3 episodes, took a lot longer to do so than I thought, decided I would sleep on it. Next day, I did not feel the need to continue. I'm sure it would be okay if I finished it. I just didn't feel like it, especially when there were so many other shows to watch from the season. So those were the 3 that I was not able to get through. One show that I wasn't entirely sure if I would get through, based mostly on it just being another isekai like Farming Life, was Campfire Cooking in Another World with My Absurd Skill. which to my surprise, and pleasant surprise at that, I ended up liking quite a bit. Perhaps because I went into it with very low expectations, I'm not sure. But it was a genuinely pretty wholesome and chill show, with characters that were mostly pretty likable. I do think the protagonist can get a little bit too whiny at times, mostly when Fel and Sui want him to go to dungeons and practice his magic and get more powerful, and he just wants nothing to do with it. Like, once or twice, sure, that's fine, but when they keep having him react in the same way, I don't know, it just kind of gets a little on my nerves to see it again and again and again. To be fair, they don't repeat it too much, but it happens enough times, so I'm like, alright, dude, come on, just do it. Other than that, I mean, it's enjoyable if you go in without super high expectations. I do think it was a good show and a fun enough time. If you expect too much out of it, I don't think it'll necessarily do you all that well. I mean, it is a show about a guy being in another world, basically just making delicious looking food with an Amazon account. It's a little out there. At least it's unique, I'll give it that, in terms of why this character is OP. And at least it is a different way for a character to be OP. Don't go in with too high expectations, and I think you'll walk away with something that's pretty enjoyable for a 12-episode romp. Another show that I didn't necessarily have the highest expectations for, but so far have been enjoying more than I thought, was Vinland Saga Season 2. Now, I know that's very controversial. I was not the biggest fan of Season 1 of Vinland Saga. I expected a lot out of it. I thought it would be an amazing show. I thought I would love it, and I just didn't. I wanted to, but I didn't. And the main reason was Thorfinn and him being a really not terribly likable character for basically the entirety of the show's run. That and just most of the characters not being ones I gravitated towards. Yes, towards the end of the season, Askeladd gets a lot of stuff to do. And sure, for those like 2 or 3 episodes, he's a cool character, but that's not really good enough. So I didn't really expect too much out of Season 2. However, the change in setting, the time skip, introduction of new characters, and Thorfinn actually going through character development and feeling the sting of the stuff he's done in his past and being haunted by it and trying to be a better person. It's a lot more interesting than what we saw in Season 1. And I feel like Thorfinn is a much more likable character because of it. I did not think Vinland Saga would get me to like Thorfinn, but it is on its way to do that. So while the season is not over yet, and I'm sure the story still has a long way to go, obviously the characters are not in Vinland yet, so eventually that's gotta happen. So far, I am much more so enjoying Season 2 compared to Season 1. It has been a much better experience for me. A show that didn't exactly go beyond my expectations for it, however, was Bungo Stray Dogs Season 4. It's more Bungo Stray Dogs. If you like it, you like it. But something about this show and these characters just does not work for me. It just does not grab me. Not because it's bad. It just does not pique my interest. Now, to be fair, the plot in Season 4 is not done, and it will be continued in a 5th season in the summer, but my opinions on the show really have not changed. It's fine, and clearly some people like it. It wouldn't have this many seasons otherwise if it didn't. It just isn't for me. I can't fully give my thoughts on the 2nd season of Bofuri simply because it isn't over yet at the time of recording because of a lot of delays, and even more so for the dub, which is how I'm watching it, so I'm even more delayed from it. But I've still been enjoying it, but I do agree with the general consensus that something seems to be missing compared to the 1st season. I'm not entirely sure what, but it feels like not as much is really going on. I do think the delays are contributing to that significantly. It could also be that we don't really have any new characters to add to the show, which maybe is something that could have spiced things up. Although, to be fair, there are a lot of characters in the show, and a lot of them really are not getting a lot of focus, which, to be fair, was the case in Season 1 as well. Nevertheless, I still think it's a fun thing to throw on and watch. I just wish it had been coming out more consistently, but what can you do? Tokyo Revengers got its 2nd season, and I do think it was a step down from Season 1, partly because of the pacing. It really felt like it was trying to stretch out things so it could fit into a 13-episode box, whereas it really didn't justify that length. Like, a lot of episodes really felt like very little was getting accomplished, especially in the middle of it. And I kind of feel like it shouldn't have been this long. I think you easily could have cut this down to like 10 episodes. But it wasn't a bad season, just a bit draggy, in my opinion. We'll have to see where the already announced third season takes things. The Magical Revolution of the Reincarnated Princess and the Genius Young Lady is a very, very long title that I struggle to say all the time. And it's a show that generally people are kind of down on, I feel. It had a lot of hype at the beginning of the season, and that hype dissipated little by little over time. As someone who watched it after it had completed and thus was aware of people's concerns of it, I don't think it's that bad. I think it's a fine enough, honestly, fairly enjoyable show. It's not amazing. It's not revolutionary, contrary to its title, but it's never something that I felt like I was forcing my way through or struggling with. It does definitely have its issues, though. It's a show that has a lot of different things that it wants to try and focus on and accomplish, but it ends up being kind of unfocused. It wants to do one thing and then do another thing, like, oh, let's focus on these magical tools and trying to fight back against this established order that really thinks that that's like sacrilegious, but at the same time, oh, we have this potential coup going on, and oh, who's going to rule the kingdom, and also, what about this character and her problems, and it just ends up being a show that does touch on all of those things here and there, little by little, but it never really feels like it develops them to completion. And maybe that would be different if it had another season, but I can't really blame people for feeling unsatisfied with the show, because it had the potential to do a lot more than it really did. So I get it. I get why people are disappointed. As someone who had lower expectations, I think it's fine. But yeah, like, this show definitely could have been better than it is. As it is right now, I could take it or leave it. It's something I didn't have a problem watching, but it definitely has its flaws because of its unfocused nature. I will mention, though, if you're concerned about watching this because it's technically an isekai, don't worry about that. There is literally only one instance in the whole show where it being an isekai is brought up, and if you removed that, there would be nothing to indicate that it is. Obviously, in the title, it suggests it, but ignoring that, this basically is just a fantasy show. So if you like fantasy but don't like the isekai angle, don't worry about it. It's really not relevant to this whatsoever. Definitely a bit of a mixed show, but one that I ended up feeling more positive towards than I think a lot of other people did at the end of the day. Play It Cool, Guys is a series of 24 short episodes, roughly 11 minutes long if you include the opening and ending. If you don't, then we're really only talking about 8-minute episodes. So this is a very quick thing to get through, but it's one of the shows that I probably liked the least from this season. And honestly, if it wasn't as short and easy to get through as it is, I very well might have dropped it. It's the kind of show that I think could have had some potential if it just had a little bit more of a hook to it. Basically, it's a show about these 4 guys, later 5, who all have this sort of aloofness to them, who are able to pass off being clumsy or making a mistake and come off as cool because of it. Because they can say, oh, I meant to do that, or oh, that's okay. Like, they can recover quickly from whatever their mistake is. It's a little bit different depending on each character, and ultimately they all kind of interconnect and meet each other and become friends. And it's fine. Like, it's an okay show, and I think if I were to have watched it maybe like 1 episode a week as it was coming out, I might not have felt as disappointed with it, but I don't know, I just expected a little bit more from it than what I got. Maybe that's not fair, but it is what it is. The show's fine. If it sounds interesting, check it out. If not, I mean, you can pop on 1 episode and spend 8 minutes of your time on it and get sort of an idea of what it's going to be like. It's okay. Not something I would write home about, but not the worst thing in the world, especially for something that's pretty short, all things considered. Buddy Daddies definitely, I think, drew a lot of comparisons to Spy Family because the 2 main adult characters are assassins, which is a little bit different from Spy Family because obviously you have a spy and an assassin, and the spy thing is much more prominent there. Here you have 2 assassins, but To have two adults in a shady business unexpectedly have to raise a little kid is obviously a similar enough premise to Spy Family. I don't think this is as good as Spy Family, but there is a decent amount to like here. The main things that I think hold this show back are A, it does get a little quick in its pacing towards the end, like it maybe needed a little more breathing room. And this is a show that I think early on is actually a bit slow, so it probably should have had better pacing overall. That's not too big of a deal. I think the main thing that will make or break this show for you is Miri. Now, she is only 4 years old, and she 100% acts like a 4-year-old. She is fairly annoying, all things considered. And while that is very realistic, and I know a lot of people will appreciate that because a criticism that's often levied at anime that involve child characters is that they don't really act like children, that they're sort of just like short adults. This is definitely a show where you have like a realistic or mostly realistic 4-year-old character. But because of that, she's not exactly the most enjoyable character to see on screen because of that. It may be realistic and maybe more of a true perspective of what it would be like to have to raise a 4-year-old, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she's terribly likable, if that makes sense. So it's going to depend on your perspective. Do you want the more realistic take, or would you rather see a character who's not as realistic, but is someone you can... Despite all that, it is still a show that will evoke similar feelings to shows like Spy Family and Bunny Drop and things like that, where you have this family start to be formed from people who are not related to each other, but still develop those familial bonds and want the best for each other, right? So if that's your bread and butter, if that's the kind of show you want to watch, this will give that to you. But it does have an added darker aspect to it, certainly darker than Spy Family tends to be. The premise is a little bit... Overall, I liked Buddy Daddies. It does have a couple shortcomings, but ultimately I think it is one of the better shows from this season. The Angel Next Door Spoils Me Rotten, I think, is a pretty good romance anime, one that doesn't really do anything too dramatic or too out there, but is competent enough to tell a meaningful, okay, here's these two characters, they meet, they slowly become friends, then they develop feelings for each other, and by the end, they're together. Good enough show, enjoyable enough for what it is. I don't really think it does enough to stand out necessarily from other shows, but it also doesn't have like any sort of strange hook to it, or at least I didn't really think so. So if you're looking for a standard vanilla, not really doing anything too crazy or unusual romance, I think you will like this one. The characters are likable enough. There's nothing really all that wrong with it. It doesn't necessarily stand out too much, but it doesn't have any crazy flaws holding it back either. Overall, pretty good show. Not amazing, but good. And finally, the last show I want to talk about is, I would say, the one I probably enjoyed the most overall, which is Tomo-chan is a Girl, a show that I thought was very funny, very enjoyable, still had an endearing romance, even though it is based on a more comedic angle, and one that I just thought was a lot of fun and that I liked watching. I think Tomo and the supporting characters are all very likable. I think the show is able to overcome a fairly simple premise. The idea that you have these two characters who have been friends since childhood, and Tomo likes her male friend, except, he originally thought that she was a guy, and that creates tension, right? That is the main crux of the show, but it goes beyond that. It is more than just, oh, ha ha, isn't it funny that he thought she was a guy and she wants to prove herself to be more feminine. There's more to it than that. Like, it explores that in, I think, a very meaningful way, and doesn't reduce the male love interest to just being like a silly idiot, while also just having very strong supporting characters. I think everyone gets something meaningful to do and gets a sense of meaningful development over the course of the series, even though it's only 13 episodes. And I think it has a very satisfying and rewarding conclusion, which is probably helped by the fact that it does adapt the end of the source material. So we would get a natural conclusion because of that, or at least you would hope so. So in the end, yeah, I think Tomo-chan was the show that I enjoyed watching the most from this season. Overall, I think winter 2023 was somewhat of a mixed bag. I think there are a number of solid, good shows, but there are also ones that are somewhat disappointing and ones that just were a little strange and a little difficult to get through. I wouldn't say there's any one show that I would look at and say, this is amazing, this is a must-watch, but there are some good ones that I would generally say, if they sound interesting to you, check out. And also unfortunately ones that I think are just not all that super interesting. So, not the worst way to start off this year of anime, though it certainly could have been better. Let's hope that the spring season has a little bit more to offer by the time it's done. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and this style of video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Leave your thoughts down below on any shows that were discussed in this video and on any shows that I did not discuss from the winter 2023 season. Thank you so much again. Take care, everyone. I'll see you next time.